James Rollins, a decorated Army veteran known for his quiet dignity and decades of unwavering service, was simply helping his daughter Emma move into her college dorm. A brief stop in a no-parking zone to unload two boxes tragically escalated. Despite James's calm explanation, campus police shockingly tased the 72-year-old veteran, throwing him onto the concrete pavement in front of his screaming daughter. The harrowing video captured when a student instantly went viral, igniting a firestorm of national outrage and trending hashtags. Emma's own powerful post, contrasting her father's military service with his public humiliation, amplified the disbelief across the nation. How could a man who fought for freedom be treated with such blatant disrespect? The country watched, stunned, demanding answers. What happens next will reveal the true character of a nation. The story of James Rollins powerfully reminds us to honor our veterans every day, not just on holidays. If you believe in basic dignity and respect for those who served our country, join our community. Hit that subscribe button and support our channel as we continue to share vital stories and advocate for a world where service is never forgotten and dignity is a right. The truck hadn't even come to a full stop before campus security approached. James Rollins, an Army veteran with decades of service behind him, had been helping his daughter Emma move into her college dorm. Only two boxes left. There were no raised voices, no signs of escalation, just a firm instruction: move the truck or face the consequences. Moments later, the patrol cruisers pulled in. "Step away from the vehicle." "She's my daughter," James replied calmly, bewildered. "I'm just helping her." But before any further words could be exchanged, a taser was discharged. Electric current surged through his body as it collapsed hard onto the pavement. Emma's scream pierced the still air. Someone must have already been recording, because by the time paramedics arrived, the video had exploded across social media. And by nightfall, the nation knew the name James Rollins, a veteran who had been tased on a college campus while carrying a box for his child. The public didn't stay silent. America reacted, but James Rollins wasn't a man who ever sought attention. Quite the opposite. Those who knew him would say he intentionally lived away from the spotlight. He was the kind of man whose life was shaped by duty, discipline, and humility. A man who followed a personal code forged in the fire of service. Born in 1951 in a modest town outside Lexington, Kentucky, James grew up in an America marked by social unrest and generational change. As many of his peers pushed back against military involvement, he felt an inner pull to serve. So at 18, fresh out of high school, he enlisted in the U.S. Army. There was no ceremony, no grand farewell, just a backpack slung over his shoulder, a fresh buzz cut, and a silent promise to do what he believed was right. For the next 22 years, James committed himself fully. Through quiet determination and unshakable work ethic, he climbed the ranks, eventually reaching the prestigious title of Command Sergeant Major, one of the highest positions attainable by an enlisted soldier. To those who served under him, he was known as the Quiet Storm. He didn't bark orders or rely on rank to command respect. He didn't need to. James led by presence, by being the first to rise each morning, the last to eat during missions, and the man who never took credit even when things went right because he believed the team mattered more than any one individual. James served in both Operation Desert Storm and Operation Iraqi Freedom, but he rarely spoke about what he witnessed on the battlefield. When asked, he'd simply say, "Some things are better kept where they are." Yet his service record said enough: 2 Bronze Stars and a Purple Heart among his decorations. When someone mentioned the medals, he'd shake his head and murmur, "They belong to the guys who didn't make it home." Even after retiring from active duty in 1991, James didn't settle into stillness. While many of his fellow veterans found solace in quiet retirements or corporate roles, James found his purpose in continuing to serve. But this time, on civilian ground. He became a regular volunteer at the local VA hospital, showing up twice a week to help younger vets navigate life after war, filling out forms, sitting through appointments, or simply offering company to those who had no one else. His most visible acts, though, came through his tireless work with Habitat for Humanity. After Hurricane Katrina and then again following Hurricane Harvey, James traveled long distances at his own expense just to lend a hand. Whether in Louisiana or Texas, He showed up with his own tools and worked side by side with strangers trying to rebuild their lives. He never looked for recognition. In fact, the only reason anyone even knew about his efforts was because a local journalist once spotted him sweating through his shirt in 95-degree heat, hauling lumber with a quiet tenacity. When asked why he was there, James shrugged and said, "If I still have two working hands, then I've got no excuse not to use them." James's resilience extended beyond his public service. His personal life had been shaped by loss. His wife, Laura, died of breast cancer when their daughter, Emma, was only 10. From that day forward, James's discipline turned inward. Everything in him shifted to focus on raising his little girl. He never remarried. "She was it," he once said quietly, tapping the simple gold ring that never left his finger, even long after Laura was gone. Emma grew up seeing two sides of her father. To the world, he was the soldier. At home, he was the man who made pancakes every Sunday morning without fail. He sat quietly in the car during every orthodontist appointment. He read the same bedtime story over and over again because it helped her fall asleep. James didn't talk about the war unless Emma asked, and even then his stories were more about the brothers in arms he'd lost or admired, not about himself. In their small town, he wasn't known for his military honors. He was known for being steady. He picked up trash during his morning walks. He paid for a stranger's coffee now and then. He waved at the mail carrier every day. And that was James Rollins, a man who served quietly, a man who endured loss and turned it into love, a man who never asked for applause, but who, on one shocking day, found himself thrust into the public eye, not for what he did in war, but for what he did as a father. And the country saw him. Hands slightly, instinctively keeping his voice calm. "I understand. I'll move it right now." But it didn't matter. The younger officer was already closing in, his hand now fully resting on his taser. The distance between them shrank fast. James glanced at Emma, her arms still wrapped around the box of towels and toiletries, her eyes wide with confusion and growing fear. She hadn't said a word, frozen, watching what had once been an ordinary moment between father and daughter transform into something neither of them could stop. "I said step away from the vehicle," the lead officer repeated, this time with force, like a command barking through a storm. James took a single step back. That's when it happened. The taser hit him with a crack that echoed off the brick dormitory walls. His body tensed, jerked, then crumpled. The box he was holding split open across the pavement. Books, chargers, notebooks scattered like debris from a storm. His shoulder hit the ground hard. Emma screamed. The officers moved in. One cuffed his wrist behind his back while the other kept a knee pressed against his spine. James didn't fight. He didn't yell. He didn't plead. He just turned his head, looked at his daughter, and said quietly, "I'm okay, Em. I'm okay." But he wasn't. Not just from the pain, though that was there, pulsing through the arm he'd injured years ago in Iraq, now pinned awkwardly beneath him, but from the deeper wound, the one you can't see, the disbelief, the humiliation, the sudden sense that the country he had once believed in, the same country he had sworn to serve and protect, no longer saw him. He was no threat, no weapon, no raised voice or clenched fist, just a father trying to help his daughter carry her things. Within minutes, phones were out. Students filming. Some murmured in shock. Others just stared. A few parents stepped back, unsure if intervening would make things worse. Emma, now on her knees beside her father, begged them to stop. "He didn't do anything, please. He's a veteran. He just wanted to help me move in." But there was no pause, no recognition, no "thank you for your service." Only procedure, cold, robotic, by-the-book enforcement that didn't care who James Rollins was. And that's what made it hurt even more. Because James wasn't just any man. He was the neighbor who fixed your fence in July without being asked. The man who stood for the anthem even when his knee hurt too much. The Marine who never talked about war unless it was to make someone else feel less alone. He was the embodiment of quiet American values, duty, integrity, sacrifice. And yet, there he was, handcuffed on a college campus sidewalk, beneath the scorching sun, surrounded by blinking lights and emotionless stares. It wasn't just about a truck parked in the wrong place. It was about what we choose to see and what we choose to ignore. about how easy it is to forget the people who've carried this country on their backs when they no longer wear a uniform. The weight of what happened didn't just fall on James, it spread. To Emma, whose first day of college would forever be marked not by excitement, but by the sight of her father in handcuffs. To the students who watched silently, their belief in justice cracked just a little. To the bystanders who realized, perhaps for the first time, that even the most decent among us can be brought down without warning. And it lingered long after the police cars left and the crowd drifted away. After James, bruised and sore, was released without charges. No apology, no explanation, just silence. But silence, too, can speak volumes. Because on that hot August morning, on a campus nestled in the quiet hills of southern Ohio, a nation was forced to confront not just what had been done to one man, but what that moment said about all of us. James stood by the truck, eyebrows furrowed in frustration, but keeping his voice calm. "I'm not resisting. I just need to grab the last box," he said, his hand gesturing gently toward the vehicle. The moment tightened like a coil. The second officer stepped in swiftly, his taser now drawn and aimed. Emma, who had been quietly standing at the back of the truck, froze in place, her small frame stiff with fear. The first officer repeated firmly, "Sir, step away from the vehicle." James extended his arm, pointing at the bed of the truck. "That's my daughter's suitcase," he said. "Let me grab it, and then we'll leave." There was no warning, no countdown, just the sharp electric snap of a taser firing. A violent jolt shot through the air, followed by the gasp of a man who had once endured the harsh winds of Desert Storm and the heat of Iraqi sandstorms, but who had never expected to collapse like this, on a college sidewalk. His knees gave out instantly. His shoulder slammed against the edge of the curb, then his body crashed onto the concrete, convulsing under the relentless current that surged through the wires now embedded in his skin. Emma's scream tore through the commotion. She dropped her backpack with a thud and rushed to her father's side. "He's a veteran. That's my dad," she shouted, tears already brimming in her eyes. Students walking past came to a halt. Some stared in disbelief. Others began recording. One young man lifted his phone and started filming. The officers, their voices now raised, ordered Emma to back away. One of them radioed for medical assistance as the crowd around them thickened with each second. "He didn't do anything," a girl yelled from the edge of the growing circle. "Why would you tase him?" another voice demanded. An older student, possibly a senior, shook his head slowly and said, loud enough for all around to hear, "Is this what we do now? This is how we treat our veterans?" The wail of sirens approached. Within minutes, paramedics arrived on scene. James was semi-conscious, blinking in slow, disoriented confusion, unable to sit up on his own. Emma knelt beside him, gripping his hand tightly. Her eyes were wide, stunned, searching for answers in the chaos. One of the officers tried to justify the situation to a faculty member who had come rushing over. "He was non-compliant," the officer explained. But the words seemed to hang in the air like fog, thin, transparent, incompletely inadequate. James wasn't handcuffed, but in every way that mattered, his dignity had been stripped. It had all happened in an instant, from a simple request to be allowed a few extra minutes to move a suitcase to a decorated veteran lying on the cold pavement in front of his daughter. And the students didn't stop filming. The footage captured it all: the taser, the fall, Emma's scream, the stillness afterward. By the time the ambulance doors closed, the silence left behind wasn't peaceful. It was a heavy, echoing stillness, the kind that lingers when something irreversible has just occurred. Within an hour, the video had spread across TikTok, Twitter, and Facebook. It was shot vertically on a shaky phone camera by a student named Kyle Marks, but every frame was clear in its message. The taser shot. James Rollins, age 72, going down. Emma's scream piercing through the background. The stunned voices, the stunned silence. No edits, no narration, just reality, raw and heartbreaking. The hashtag started gaining traction. Honor our veterans, #justice for James, #tased for parking. The tone of the post was unmistakable: fury, sadness, disbelief. One read, "This man fought for our country, and now he's treated like a threat just for helping his daughter move into college." Another said, What kind of place tases a veteran over a suitcase? But the post that would resonate the most didn't come from an activist, a reporter, or a witness. It came from Emma. She uploaded two photos side by side. One showed James in uniform, young and proud, holding baby Emma in his arms. The other was a still from the video, James on the ground, taser wires still connected to his body. Her caption was simple, but devastating. My dad served this country for 22 years. Today it couldn't spare him 2 minutes of respect. Within 48 hours, her post had been shared over 3 million times. Local news was the first to run the story. Veteran tased during move-in day at Crestwood College. But it didn't stay local for long. By the next morning, national outlets had picked it up. Decorated vet tased on campus. NBC. He served his country, then he was tased while helping his daughter. TNNN. Crestwood College under fire after the police incident goes viral. Fox News. A storm of outrage followed, swift and relentless. Veterans organizations across the country mobilized. Videos poured in from the American Legion, AMVETS, and multiple VFW chapters, all condemning what had happened. One Vietnam veteran looked straight into the camera and said, "We carried the weight of this country on our backs. Now they throw us to the ground like we're nothing?" His voice cracked near the end, his face hard with grief. James Rollins had gone to campus to help his daughter carry a suitcase. What followed was a national reckoning. I never got to say thank you to mine. What had begun as a spark of public outrage had grown into a powerful, sweeping movement. People across the country weren't just responding with words, they were taking action. Murals of James Rollins appeared in cities like Austin, Sacramento, and Pittsburgh. In one striking image painted on the side of a veterans center in Dallas, he stood tall in uniform with his arm outstretched, shielding a little girl, Emma, while lightning bolts of a taser cracked above him. The caption read, "This is not how we honor courage." News outlets scrambled to cover the expanding ripple effects. Universities across the country began reviewing their campus policing protocols. Panels were formed, task forces launched, but more than that, people were talking. In classrooms, at kitchen tables, on sidewalks, in coffee shops. Americans began to ask each other hard questions they had long avoided. What does respect look like? Who gets to feel safe? And why did it take one man's fall for us to open our eyes? At the center of it all, Emma Rollins carried herself with a quiet resilience far beyond her years. She was seen, at first, as the girl in the viral video, her small frame trembling, her voice begging for them to stop, her hands reaching out to shield her father. But in the weeks that followed, her image evolved. She began writing. A letter she penned to her father was published by the New York Times, titled, "For the Man They Forgot to Salute." In it, she wrote, "You told me once that being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing the right thing anyway. That day, you were brave for me. Now I'm trying to be brave for you." The letter touched millions. It was read aloud at vigils and played on radio stations. People framed it in their homes. Veterans carried it in their breast pockets. By the end of the month, national conversations had taken root. Veteran organizations reported a spike in volunteer signups and donations. A congressional hearing was scheduled to address how veterans are treated in civilian spaces. Even school boards began revisiting how their campus security teams were trained. There were no easy answers, no perfect resolutions, but there was momentum. Meanwhile, James Rollins remained in recovery. He spoke little to the media, but when he did, his voice was calm, humble, and unwavering. "This was never supposed to be about me," he said in a brief interview outside the VA hospital. "This is about making sure the next guy doesn't have to go through it. That's all I want." And perhaps that's what made him a symbol that endured. Not the fall, but the grace that followed it. Not the noise, but the silence of veterans standing guard without anger, without violence, without vengeance. Just a quiet, immovable dignity. America had looked away too long. But now, with James Rollins's face etched into its conscience, it could no longer pretend not to see. The daughter who stood unwaveringly by her father when the world chose to look the other way became the image etched in the minds of millions. While James Rollins recovered in a nearby VA hospital, the quiet wave of support transformed into a rising tide that could no longer be overlooked. What started as sympathetic comments online quickly evolved into something much larger. Across the country, veterans groups didn't just share hashtags. They mobilized. Social media posts gave way to action. A national petition demanding federal legislation that would require veteran awareness training for all campus police in the United States was launched in James's name. And for others like him who had been misunderstood, mistreated, or forgotten. In just 6 days, it shattered expectations, collecting more than 3 million signatures. Then came something no one saw coming, the honor ride. It began simply, 12 riders, all veterans, mounted on roaring Harley-Davidsons. Leather jackets, worn and creased with time, bore patches from Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, silent testaments to battles fought long ago. But as the ride went on, the formation grew. More riders joined with each passing mile. By the time they reached the front gates of Crestwood College, over 150 bikers from 5 neighboring states had gathered, forming a thundering procession. Each bike proudly flew a full-sized American flag that caught the wind like sails at sea. They circled the campus 3 times, engines rumbling like distant thunder, a sound that resonated deeper than any speech ever could. It wasn't a protest. No fists were raised, no slogans were chanted. This was something far more profound, a tribute, a signal, a wordless message delivered through action. Inside the administration building, faculty members pressed their faces to the glass, watching in silence. On the lawn, students stood with hands over their hearts. Some held signs, their messages simple but powerful. Respect isn't optional. Honor is action, not apology. And veterans deserve better. The crowd said nothing, but the stillness spoke volumes. But the most seismic shift came from far beyond Crestwood's ivy-covered walls. Congressman Daniel Reeves, representing James Rollins' district in Kentucky and a former Marine himself, took the floor of the House of Representatives. His voice carried the weight of not just one man's story, but 1,000 others like it. What happened to James Rollins is not an isolated case, he declared. It's a symptom of a cultural sickness, a habit of forgetting the very people who secured our right to forget. His words cut through the chamber. We cannot teach American history in classrooms while turning our backs on it in the streets. He ended with a call to action, a full congressional hearing into the conduct and training of campus police officers at public universities. As he stepped back, the room was still. Not a shuffle, not a whisper. By the end of that same week, lawmakers from both sides of the aisle had signed on. Momentum built, plans began taking shape. Journalists, sensing a deeper story, widened their lens. Crestwood was no longer the only school under scrutiny. Others with similar disciplinary policies were now being forced into the spotlight. What had happened to James was evolving into a national conversation, not just about an incident, but about what that incident revealed. Still lying in a hospital bed, shoulder bruised and pride slowly healing, James Rollins had become an accidental symbol, not because he sought attention, and certainly not because he craved the spotlight, but because, through him, the nation was reminded of something essential, something worth remembering. That honor can be earned quietly, and sometimes it must be defended loudly. Exactly 1 week after James was tased in front of his young daughter Emma, Crestwood College hosted its first home football game of the season. The stadium was packed, the sky crisp and clear, but the buzz in the air had nothing to do with touchdowns. No one was talking about the opposing team. All eyes were on the crowd, searching, waiting, wondering if James Rollins would be there. Earlier that week, Crestwood's administration had issued a very public invitation. They offered James a seat at the 50-yard line, promised a halftime ceremony in his honor, and even extended an offer of free tuition for Emma. It was their way of making amends, a gesture of reconciliation. But James, in his quiet dignity, declined. His response was delivered in a short, handwritten letter to the college president. In it, he expressed gratitude for the offer, but made his stance clear. This isn't about ceremony, he wrote. It's about principle. You don't fix broken trust with a spotlight. You fix it with change. So James stayed home, but America did not forget him. As the second quarter ended and the crowd rose for halftime, a new kind of hush fell over the stadium. The announcer's voice cut through the quiet. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing for a special presentation in honor of all who have served. From the far tunnel emerged 50 uniformed veterans representing every branch of the United States military. They marched in perfect formation, no drums, no trumpets, just the sound of synchronized footsteps against turf. Their uniforms were crisp, their expressions solemn. As they reached the 50-yard line, they turned sharply toward the main broadcast camera. One by one, in silent unity, each veteran raised their hand in salute. There were no cheers, no clapping, just a long, motionless moment held in collective reverence. A tribute, clear, wordless, and unforgettable, dedicated to the man who wasn't in the stands, but whose presence filled every inch of that field. From a hospital bed hundreds of miles away, James Rollins sat upright, remote in hand, his daughter Emma quietly nestled beside him. The television flickered with the image of a wide-open field, a moment frozen in time, the sharp, unified salute of those gathered in solemn respect. No words passed between them, but Emma, even years later, would recall how that moment slowed everything inside her. It felt as if her childhood paused, holding its breath, trying to contain something far too vast to fit inside words. That simple gesture, so powerful, so deeply human, spread like wildfire. Within minutes, the footage swept across the internet and television screens. Every major network aired it. Veterans from coast to coast shared the clip with a caption that echoed like a quiet anthem. He didn't need to be there to be seen. But it didn't stop with that. Later that month, the phone rang in James's hospital room. On the other end of the line was the President of the United States. The call was private, only James and Emma were there to hear it. But eventually, James shared what mattered most. The President didn't offer excuses. He didn't sugarcoat what had happened. He simply said, "We owe you more than that, and we're going to do better." And for James, that was enough. Just those few words, honest, clear, without pretense. Within days, James was transferred to Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, not only for a thorough medical evaluation, but for something far more unexpected, an official ceremony, a recognition that had long been overdue. In a quiet auditorium filled with uniformed service members, their families, and just a few select guests, James stood to receive a citation from the Department of Veterans Affairs. It wasn't about medals. It wasn't about public attention. In fact, James specifically requested that there be no cameras, no national broadcast. "This isn't about one man," he said. "It's about what kind of nation we want to be." The moment passed quietly, with more weight than fanfare, but its ripples extended far beyond that room. What came next wasn't just emotional, it was structural. The outpouring of support, the frustration voiced by veterans and civilians alike, sparked something real. On campuses across the country, from small liberal arts colleges to sprawling state universities, change took root. Policies were rewritten, protocols re-examined. Out of it emerged the Veterans Recognition and Response Act, a comprehensive resolution mandating that all campus law enforcement undergo training in veteran awareness, trauma sensitivity, and respectful engagement. The message behind the act was both simple and revolutionary. Service doesn't end when the uniform comes off, and neither should the respect. In just 3 months, more than 60 universities had adopted the new framework. Many more would follow. Crestwood College, the campus where it all began, was among the first to fully implement the training. This time, they didn't make a public statement. They didn't seek to polish their image. They just got to work. And yet, the most unforgettable moment in all of this wasn't delivered by James or even the president. It came from Emma. At a televised town hall hosted by the university and broadcast statewide, Emma stood alone before a crowd of professors, students, community members, and reporters. No script, no prepared statement, just a daughter, carrying the quiet strength her father had passed on to her. Her voice didn't shake. Her words didn't need decoration. "My father never asked for special treatment. He never wanted attention. Most of you don't even know what he's lived through. But what he did ask for, what every veteran deserves, is basic dignity. The kind that doesn't vanish in a parking lot, the kind that doesn't get tased on a sidewalk, the kind that remembers service even after the war is over." No applause followed, only silence. The kind of silence that doesn't come from confusion or indifference, but from clarity, from truth settling in. Because in that moment, everyone understood this wasn't about one incident, one campus, or even one man. It was about a standard, one the country had dangerously let slip. And it had taken someone like James Rollins, someone who never once asked to be seen, to remind them what it should look like. The story of James wasn't about a parking spot or a single officer's misjudgment. It became a mirror, reflecting the tendency of a nation to overlook those who once stood in harm's way on its behalf. It became a wake-up call about how often quiet dignity is mistaken for irrelevance in a world that rewards noise, speed, and spectacle. James never asked to become a symbol. Like many who served, he believed in actions over words. His medals stayed locked away in a wooden box tucked in the back of a closet. The faint scars on his body never found their way into photographs. His posture, still as straight as it had been during his military days, spoke more about discipline than pride. These were the marks of a man who had given more than he'd ever taken, and who had part of the matter this story lays bare. In a society that proudly waves flags and holds ceremonies to celebrate service, on holidays during parades and stirring speeches, we so often fail to carry that same reverence into the quiet, ordinary spaces of daily life. We craft moving tributes on Veterans Day, share photos with solemn captions, and applaud at halftime during football games. Yet in the very next moment, we look right past the elderly veteran waiting patiently in line at the pharmacy. We pretend not to notice the man with a limp and a worn army jacket who timidly asks for help finding the right aisle in the grocery store. We claim to admire sacrifice in the abstract, but forget how that sacrifice continues, how it walks beside us, unannounced, in real, lived silence. One veteran's words beneath the viral video cut straight to the truth. "You honor us in speeches, but not on sidewalks." Another added, "I didn't fight to be clapped for. I fought so I wouldn't be treated like a burden when I came home." That raw honesty stripped away all pretense. What happened to James Rollins wasn't just a personal injustice. It was a mirror held up to all of us. The deeper tragedy would be if we felt a brief surge of outrage, then moved on, unchanged and unbothered. Because this was never just about one man, one moment, or one headline. This was about every soldier who returned without cameras or ceremony, who quietly laid their past aside and asked for nothing more than to be seen, not as a symbol, not as a problem, but as a human being with worth. It's about confronting a hard question. Do we truly still see them? Not just on holidays, but on Tuesdays in line at the bank, at gas stations, in waiting rooms. Do we still value that quiet sacrifice? Or have we grown so used to noise and spectacle that we need a viral moment to stir our conscience? James Rollins never raised his voice. He didn't retaliate or lash out. Instead, by standing still, by enduring, he showed us a strength that doesn't rely on anger or volume. A strength forged in hardship, grounded in quiet dignity. And that, more than anything, shook people awake. The nation didn't respond because it was ordered to. It responded because something deeper stirred. Something that told us a line had been crossed. That somewhere along the way, respect had been reduced to ceremony, and it was time to bring it back into the spaces where it actually matters. The story of James Rollins didn't end in that moment. It continues. Each time someone chooses to make eye contact instead of turning away. Each time someone meets a question with patience instead of suspicion. Each time we remember that dignity is not a prize to be handed out, but a birthright, one that no one should have to fight for a second time.